I think I've met almost everybody, I think, at the workout on Saturday, and that was really great to be able to meet you guys. And I already told you about myself. So, again, I'm Katie. I'm the registered dietitian that works. My business is called No Co Sports Nutrition, so I do a lot of work with athletes. So, today I'm going to be talking just really quickly, first going over a review of nutrition, just some basic stuff, and then talking about fueling for activity. And then I'm going to be answering some questions that I've kind of thought of, as well as discussing just important things for females in general, just some things, some considerations regarding health and nutrition for females specifically. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of move forward here. Just a really basic reminder about carbohydrate foods, proteins, and fats, because I do talk about them, and I just want everybody to be on the same page with what I'm talking about. And then even in the meal plan, just knowing the difference between carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, so our macronutrients essentially, and what they're doing for our in our body. So just with carbohydrates, just a reminder that we have our starchy vegetables. So that's kind of in the upper, I believe it's the left-hand corner for most of you, but that's going to be potatoes, sweet potatoes, winter squashes, so any kind of butternut, buttercup, acorn, pumpkin. We're going to have our corn is going to be in that category, and peas, and then legumes or pulses, so that would be any kind of bean or lentil. And then keep in mind that beans and lentils also are a protein food. Obviously, we kind of know carbohydrates are going to be grains, and so I have a picture of the bread and the rice and pastas and some kind of cereal. So you have the grains, and then obviously when we're talking about grains, we're going to want to encourage more whole grains. So that'd be any mostly unprocessed grain, and white flour being one of the more highly processed grains. And then our fruits are kind of on the other side, and that's going to be obviously with fruit, it's going to be the fructose in fruit, which is mostly sugar, but it's naturally occurring sugar. So obviously fruits aren't a bad choice. You just want to keep in mind that they do have a naturally occurring sugar in them. And then dairy products like yogurt and milk specifically are going to be a carbohydrate food, versus cheeses of any sort, and cottage cheese is not a carbohydrate food. That's more of a protein. And then I have the vegetables in the very top, but most vegetables are not considered high in carbohydrates, so I never count them towards carbohydrate food. Like if I'm carb counting or giving someone specifics, I'm never including those in there because they're so high in fiber and so low in total energy that they're not really, they're kind of a free food, I guess. So eating as many non-starchy vegetables as you want really won't contribute a whole lot to carbs, but they do go kind of in this category just mostly because of their fiber content. And then just a reminder on protein. So we have our nuts and eggs and soy products, and I mentioned already dairy. So obviously most dairy has protein, and then yogurt and milk have carbs as well, and then meats and fish and poultry. And so those are really going to be the major sources of our diet for proteins. And then just a reminder on fats, I kind of threw together some of these pictures, but there's I have olive oil in there. I have avocados are very high in healthy fats, fish, nuts and nuts and seeds. Those are all of those things that I just mentioned, not including the butter, are all considered unsaturated fats. And those are going to be really heart healthy fats that you want to incorporate more of. And then the saturated fats, maybe a little bit less of those with butters and some of those animal proteins and things like that. You'd want to not totally limit, but you just want to be a little bit more careful. So when you're looking at fats, that's really going to be where most of our fat is coming from, and unsaturated being just liquid at room temperature, and then solid fats are more of our saturated fats. So when we're kind of looking back at carbohydrates versus proteins and fats, carbohydrates are really going to fuel our cells. They're sort of the most efficient fuel source. Proteins are really more for muscle building and repair. In fact, almost every tissue in our body has protein in it. So it's a very necessary nutrient, and it's also part of our bone matrix. We have protein. So it's very important nutrient. And then fat as well I think sometimes we're a little less scared of fat now. Obviously, there's some higher fat diets coming out with the ketogenic diet and some others, and so fat is no longer sort of the evil nutrient, and it never really was. It's always very important to have plenty of healthy fats in the diet. So trying to incorporate more of those, and I'll talk about another reason why fat is important for females specifically once we get to that point. So I just wanted to do a quick review. I know that's probably super basic and most people already know that, but I like to do that just because it helps lay the foundation for the rest of what I'm going to be chatting about today. So I'm going to kind of come back in a minute, but I do want to talk about fueling activity. Let's see. I'm going to stop the sharing now. So I'm going to come back and chat a minute. But when we're talking about activity, it's really important to kind of distinguish the different kinds of activity and the importance of fueling for different types of activity, because it's going to be a little different depending on what you're doing. If you're, not to say that leisure walk or leisurely walk or a very low intensity activity is not important or worth doing, but if you're going to be going for like a 30-minute walk, you probably don't need to be, eating and fueling for that as much because you're probably not going to have the same digestive issues that you would if you were going to go for a long run or a high intensity activity, and you're not going to be burning a ton of energy. So you're not necessarily going to be wanting to follow these recommendations for that sort of activity. But if you're going to be doing some more high intensity activity, like perhaps what you were doing on Saturday with the boxing, that's going to be super high intensity, a lot of effort, probably was at least an hour that you were out there, you were moving. So that sort of activity, you do want to make sure you're going to be fueling before and after to support what you're doing when you're going to do activity. The thing that I notice a lot of people do is they maybe aren't fueling correctly, and then they're wondering why they're going into their exercise kind of feeling fatigued or not able to make it through very well. Maybe they get home and they're really tired or don't seem to have a lot of energy the rest of the day. And oftentimes it may just be because you're starting a new activity and you're just tired, but it could also potentially be fueling. And so it's really important to make sure that you are fueling correctly. So I'm going to go back to the screen share and kind of go into that activity piece. So eating before a workout, obviously this is going to really be different depending on what time you're going to be working out. So I'm going to kind of address that a little bit, but ideally you would eat 2 to 3 hours before a workout. For those individuals who are waking up at 5 in the morning to go work out at 6 a.m., that's not feasible. I'm not asking anybody to get up at 3 or 4 in the morning so they can have a full breakfast before they go work out. It's just not possible. And I also value sleep. So you don't want to do that. So you want to make sure that you, keep that in mind if you're going to be waking up super early. Perhaps you can make it through a workout in the morning if you fueled well the day before and had a good dinner. You may not need to be eating before. You just want to make sure that afterwards you have a good meal, a post-workout fueling. But sometimes it does help people to just have a little something. Maybe it's just half a banana and some peanut butter on there, or even just something that they drink real quick. Like I have some people do a little bit of like almond milk or something with some protein because they're doing a weight workout and they want the protein in that. So it doesn't have to be a whole lot. I've even had people that make overnight oats and they just eat a few bites of their overnight oats before they go to their workout, and then they eat the rest of it afterwards. So just whatever, if you're working out super early in the morning, that might not be as feasible, but if you happen to work out mid-morning or even mid-afternoon, perhaps 2 to 3 hours before, you'd want to have a pretty good solid breakfast. So I have the pancakes pictured here. These are just some pictures that I happen to have, but you could have, a bowl of oatmeal with some nuts in there and some, maybe some fruit, or, maybe you'd want to have some protein with eggs and toast. So something generally is good to have, something with carbohydrate and some protein but you don't, in the hours, especially the 2 hours leading up to a workout or before, you really don't want to have a ton of fiber and a ton of fat, because um, that just sort of sits in your stomach and it takes a little longer to digest, which isn't such a bad thing. But if you're going to be going into a high intensity workout, or you're doing some sort of longer duration workout, that could cause some stomach problems. Sometimes people even report having dairy issues. I know personally, like, I don't tend to have an issue with dairy, but if I have yogurt or milk within a few hours before a workout, for me, it really causes my stomach to hurt. So just kind of learning those foods that you can tolerate before, but you also want to have about 16 to 20 ounces of fluid within the few hours before, if you can. Now, if you're waking up early and getting out to go to your workout, you might, sip some water on your way over there. I would say, it's best to sip it, but you probably want to get a little bit of fluid in you before your workout if you work out early, because you haven't had anything to drink all night. And so you're going to be somewhat dehydrated when you wake up. So trying to get some fluid in you. And then if you work out, I kind of gave a couple scenarios. Some people work out over the lunch hour, so maybe you would have a good breakfast and then a snack a few hours before. And then if you work out in the evening, you might want to again have like a good solid lunch. I have a sandwich pictured here. It could be stir fry with some veggies and chicken, some sort of carbohydrate, protein, and not super high in fiber. So what I mean that by fiber is, I don't think having some whole grains is a big deal. I don't think having a few veggies is a big deal, but you may not want to have like a big kale salad a few hours before your workout, because that might cause you to have stomach issues, and you might not want to have, a ton of those, like a big, huge salad. But maybe, maybe you could. It just, everybody's a little bit individual, but you want to kind of keep that in mind. And then you want to, after your workout, you do want to have something to eat within an hour or two. So I'm going to kind of switch over to this slide, to this picture. So you do want to eat, again, you want it to have protein. That's going to be really important. Specifically too, if you've done any sort of workout that's high intensity or strength training, like the boxing type of workout, you definitely want to have a good amount of protein. And what I think about protein, I'm thinking about 20 to 30 grams of protein seems to be the sweet spot for after a workout. So that would be equivalent in, like the picture here, a couple eggs, but then maybe you have a really good whole grain toast, or like Dave's Killer bread is one I particularly like, and they have, that particular bread has seeds in it and things like that, so it is actually high in protein itself. So that would be, that sort of breakfast or post-workout meal would be a higher in protein. You could do, I had a smoothie pictured, like a chia seed pudding. You could do that might be something you would do for breakfast, or you could just have a really good solid lunch with, again, maybe you could do a big salad at this point and maybe have some fruit on the side. So again, you do want to have some protein with that, and keeping in mind that with protein, if you're doing meat, I just kind of have, I can't see myself, so I don't know if you can see me, but about the size of the palm of your hand is about 3 ounces here. So if you could, that's basically all you really need in protein per meal. So you don't need to have an excessive amount. It's just important that you sort of spread that out and have that during the day. And then also at this point, you do want to add in some of those healthy fats. You probably didn't want to have a ton of those before the workout, or at least within the few hours before, but now is a good time to maybe add in some more of those healthy fats. So again, sliced avocados, actually that would be really even better on that toast with the eggs that I pictured there. So having some healthy fat, but really what you're doing by eating, making sure you're fueling well for your workout, is you're giving your body the nutrients it needs to support you through the workout, so that you're able to have the energy you need during the workout. And then you're wanting to eat within an hour or two after, something that's going to help promote recovery from that workout. So every time, especially if it's high intensity, even if it's an endurance type workout where you're on a run or something, you're still having this muscle fiber breakdown. So you want to have the nutrients in order to sort of stop the process of breakdown and start promoting the process of building up, which means not that you're going to become a bodybuilder or, you're going to become huge, because that's very uncommon for women, but more that you're going to repair those muscles and become even stronger than you were before the workout. And then that's just sort of how you progress when you're active and you're doing more working out and being more active. So just something to kind of consider. So I'm going to talk a little bit now. I hope that that gave you some thoughts on, fueling for activity. I don't want to kind of belabor that too much. If you have specific questions, you can go ahead and type those in, and I'd be happy to talk more if you have specific questions about like maybe your own situation as well, or you could just email me, or do that. Part of that 20-minute consult is part of all of this. So if you think of individual questions, that would be a perfect time for that. But with women, in general, I have these kind of, infographic type pictures here, but the first one I have on there is bone, the bone breaking thing. So just to kind of come out, I'm going to stop the share and kind of come out of here. All right. So I think hopefully you guys can see me now. Hi Emma, I just saw that you're on there. Okay. So I'm coming out of the picture. I'm just going to talk with you guys a little bit. But when for women, when we're just complicated creatures, I guess. I don't know how else to say it. I think we all sort of realize that we have a lot of, fluctuations in hormones that occur, every month. And then when we finally get to that point in that stage where we no longer, have our periods, and we're sort of going through premenopause and menopause and postmenopause, we start to have even, more sort of these different fluctuations in hormones. And so unfortunately, throughout these sort of different lifespans, there are things that can happen. And, I'm not it's probably too much beyond the scope of this webinar to go into a lot of details about all the sort of hormonal things going on. But one thing I often notice with women is, or one of the big concerns I have, is bones and bone health and osteopenia and osteoporosis. And so unfortunately, as women, we are at greater risk for these bone, having weaker bones. And that's mostly because, our bone health is really strongly linked with estrogen. And so especially if once we hit those menopausal years, we are no longer producing the same amount of estrogen, and we even get greater risk of developing osteoporosis. That doesn't mean that you're going to get it. It just means that there's more of a risk. So there's going to be certain nutrients that are going to be really important for especially women. And there's also going to be certain activities you can be doing to help prevent that bone loss. So first, talking about nutrients, calcium, we all think of, I think everybody thinks of calcium because, we know that calcium builds strong bones. It's not the only nutrient, so it's important to remember that. But calcium is a really important nutrient in bone health. So if you are considering not having dairy products, it's not that you need to have them in order to have strong bones. You just want to consider where you're getting your calcium from. Is it going to be leafy greens and that kind of thing? Are you going to be getting it from almond milk that's fortified with calcium? Are you going to, if you're not going to be doing that, you need to be considering that intake of calcium from some source. And so just keep in mind, if you're doing lots of leafy greens and relying on that sort of vegetable intake, that a lot of our vegetables do have a compound called oxalates that binds to the calcium. So we don't absorb 100% of the calcium in our greens. So you do have to remember, you have to eat at least 5 to 9 servings of vegetables a day, and probably some seeds and other, sometimes soy products do have calcium. Again, that might be of concern for some women who have a breast cancer genes or something like that, but you do want to make sure you're getting that from somewhere. And the other important nutrient is going to be vitamin D. So we all know, I think people are really aware of vitamin D because we hear about it a lot. It's coming from the sun, it's hitting our skin, it's causing the reaction and that's kind of the beginning of the formation of vitamin D. So we really are supposed to be getting it from the sun, but these days and age, we're not out in the sun as much, and we're wearing sunscreen. And so I'm not telling you to stop wearing sunscreen. I just want you to consider, I would highly consider getting a vitamin D test done. You can actually do that through your doctor, or just go to a lot of the labs around, and even some of the UC Health labs. You can actually just go request a vitamin D, and you don't have to have a doctor's referral. So I do encourage, especially women, to do that so they can know, their vitamin D status, and then see where they're at. But it might not hurt to take a vitamin D supplement. It's just good to know where your levels are, because I always hesitate to recommend high doses of any nutrient without knowing kind of what the status of that nutrient is. So you're going to have calcium, you're going to have vitamin D. You also have other minerals like magnesium does play a role. So sometimes you do see calcium, magnesium supplements, and then also vitamin K2. So there's two different types of K. There's vitamin K1 and vitamin K2. The vitamin K1 is more needed for blood clotting, and the vitamin K2 is actually produced by some of the bacteria in our gut. There's and fermentation is one of the ways. So if you eat kimchi, or you eat any kind of probiotic, my favorite is raw sauerkraut, you'll actually get some of that nutrient, and that's another important one for bones. So you want to make sure you're going to get all of these nutrients in order for healthy bones. But the other important thing is you can't have strong bones without having some sort of stimulus on your bones. So if you are doing mostly activities such as swimming, maybe you haven't been very active at all, so that's a risk factor for having weaker bones. So if you can do any sort of, like, the boxing is a perfect example of a great activity for bone health, because you're sort of having this impact, and every time you sort of hit the punching bag, or you're doing something like that, you're actually kind of stimulating, you're putting stress on your bone, and you're stimulating it to get stronger. And so you're going to have this bone formation that might be occurring. Or if, unfortunately, when we hit menopause, our bones don't get a whole lot stronger, we can actually make them keep them where they're at, and not lose any more bone density after a certain point. So we want to make sure that we're taking good care of our bones. And so it's important to kind of consider all of these things. I'm not necessarily saying you need to take a supplement for bone health, but if you're not eating foods that are going to be high in those nutrients, you might want to just kind of potentially look into that. And then the other one I had on here, I'm going to share my screen again, was this kind of funny looking dude with the little things coming at it. And so another special consideration for women is just the immune system. And I have noticed more recently that women do tend to be at a little higher risk for autoimmune diseases, and just kind of more of a some immune risks there. So that's one consideration. I'll talk a little bit about that. Looks like somebody else has joined in, so that's great. So I think it's hard to tell exactly what's going on with some of these autoimmune conditions, and some of these, where the body is essentially attacking itself. But one thing, I do want to mention on that is just making sure that you are eating a diet that is, essentially very high nutrient dense. And what I mean by that is, so I'm going to kind of come back. What I mean by that is that you want a diet that's going to be high in fruits and vegetables. So you want to, if you're going to be eating grains, you want them to be whole grains. You want to really minimize the intake of processed foods. And essentially, what I mean by processed, the definition is kind of odd. Anytime we even cook food, technically, you could consider that processing food. But what I mean is more of the ultra processed foods, the packaged foods that you're finding in the stores. And I know that sometimes those are super convenient and it's easy, but just trying to do your best to have more of those whole foods, cooking when you can from scratch, or just trying to find more minimally processed foods. And just the more nutrient dense our diet is, the more nutrients like vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals and antioxidants and all those fancy words, but all those things are actually going to be very protective of our health. So making sure that we are really, eating those foods to make sure we keep our immune system really strong. And obviously other things, other factors like sleep and stress are going to play a role in that too. So there's going to be a lot of things to consider. But I did want to mention the um, immune system. And then the other thing I have is that gas, kind of the fueling thing. That's another piece I see with women is fueling inadequately sometimes, or maybe not the right type of fueling, or not fueling at the right times. And so, but oftentimes I do see this sort of under fueling, and surprisingly enough, I see this even with women who are maybe feel that they have some weight to lose. I do see the underfueling sort of chronically. And the problem with this sort of chronic underfueling is that it does cause the metabolism to slow. It can, obviously if you're not fueling adequately, you could be not getting enough protein or enough vitamins and minerals. So I do see this commonly with women, and just making sure, if you got that meal plan, make sure you do calculate your needs. I'm hesitant to recommend people count calories, because that's not the whole picture, and not every calorie in, calorie out. That doesn't always work out exactly that way, because different types of macronutrients maybe act differently in the body. So it's never that simple, unfortunately. But it could, if you feel like you could do this and it wouldn't cause you to have some sort of, sometimes people calorie counting, it'll cause them to have some restrictive behaviors. And I definitely think that would actually make that whole situation of underfueling worse. But sometimes it's helpful to go in and maybe do a MyFitnessPal or something like that, where you can see exactly how much you're eating, and kind of take how much you are eating and take how much you've calculated your needs to be, and see how well they match up. It's just something to do. It doesn't mean you have to track forever, but I actually do this occasionally because I train a lot for different races. So sometimes I just want to make sure that I am not under fueling, because I do have a history. When I was training several years ago, I was actually, back when I was in grad school, I personally had a history of under fueling for training, and I didn't do it purposefully. I just happened to be really busy in grad school and training for a marathon. And so those things didn't really work well together. And I ended up having an issue with overtraining, and the consequences of that were pretty dire. I mean, not dire, but they weren't good. I had some real serious consequences of that have kind of been long lasting. So if you can, make sure you're fueling correctly, and make sure you're I like the word fueling, because it sort of makes it seem like, okay, I'm going to be providing my body the energy it needs. And then you kind of take the thought away from, oh, this is how many calories I'm eating, or, that kind of thing. So just keeping that in mind. And then the last thing I have on there is just the heart, and making sure that, you're aware, some women, we tend to live a little bit longer. And sometimes what we don't talk about is women and heart health. And so just making sure that you're exercising, you're eating, heart healthy fats, like the monounsaturated fats from fish oils, from avocados, from nuts and seeds, and olives and olive oil, and really trying to incorporate a lot of those good healthy fats in your diet, trying to really eat an overall well-balanced diet. And sometimes, are you guys able to still see me? I just got a notification that my internet is, oh, okay. So Emma, did you say that boxing is a great activity for someone who doesn't move much? I mean, obviously it's good for all women, but specifically, I would say maybe boxing isn't like I mean, for someone that doesn't move much, that might be hard to go from not moving much to something like boxing right away. So it's more about the high impact part of it. So if you're sort of going from zero to something, you could box, but I would say maybe be careful about how intense. Let your instructor know that you're just going from not moving very much to you're just starting out. So anytime you start a new activity, you obviously don't want to go from 0 to 100 all at once. So if you haven't been moving much, yes, I don't think boxing is a bad idea, but you just want to make sure that you're communicating with your boxing instructor to let them know that you haven't been really that active. But it is a good activity for most people because of the high impact of it. Boxing or any kind of weightlifting, and you don't have to do weights. I think when I say weight training or strength training, I think people oh yeah, so sorry, I'm looking at your comment, Emma. So I think people think of like training in the gym and they're like lifting tons of heavy weights, and that's not at all what I mean. Strength training could just be using your own body weight, doing planks or squats with your own body weight, or lunges or things like that, that you don't even need gym, to go to the gym or have equipment. It's just a matter of just using your body. Running is another, it's kind of you have that impact against the ground every time you hit. I'm not saying everybody should be a runner, but it's just an example. Whereas swimming, because you don't have that gravity, sort of that impact, swimming is not is a great activity. It's not going to be as good for bone health or bone formation. So it's a great activity, but you want to supplement that with something else. And then cycling as well is not, because there's not really any impact going on. It's a really great activity, but you just want to maybe supplement that with something else that's going to help have that little bit of impact to help with both. I hope that kind of make sense. Just kind of reading. Yeah, so I would say don't go from zero to super high impact all at once. You want to kind of go slowly when you're adding activity. You don't want to have it be like all of a sudden you're jumping into sports and not go, you're going to burn out or you're going to get injured. You don't want to break a bone essentially either. So you don't want to have it. I don't want you to be like, oh, she said I should go high impact and then I do something crazy and break your bone, because there's a fine balance there. You want to have just enough stress on that bone to cause it to want to get stronger, and there's just a little bit of stress, but you never want to stress it obviously to the point where you break it. So I think if you got to be doing something pretty crazy, like jumping off of something, or doing parkour or something where you're like or if you have like a bike crash or something like that sort of impact, you want to be careful of. But generally, if you have fairly strong bones, something like boxing wouldn't really necessarily cause you to break a bone. Anyway, I kind of went off the tangent there, but those are just some things. I mean, I don't know if anyone, if you have any follow-up questions about the piece of it with women's health. I just kind of wanted to kind of briefly mention that. One thing I want to make sure I talk about is that, sometimes women, what we don't understand is that our hormones are, fat actually is really important for female hormones. And so something I also notice with women is that they really restrict their fat intake. And this is maybe, like I said, not as common now as we're starting to understand the importance of fat more, but I often see this really low fat diet. And, one thing to keep in mind is that women, especially if we are like low, or kind of under eating and under fueling, that can really have a negative impact on our hormones. So we want to make sure we are eating a good amount of healthy fat. I think I've included quite a few in that meal plan that I provided. So just to make sure that you are, doing that, watching your carbohydrate. When I say watch carbohydrate intake, I don't mean low carb, but just making sure that you're not, you're trying to reduce the amount of added sweets in your diet, lots of sugar. Sometimes people report just kind of having this sort of addiction, or I don't even think that's a good word because it's nothing like an addiction, but it's like this sort of dependency on sugar. And it's really hard sometimes for people just to limit their sugar intake because they get cravings. Well, that's usually a big sign that something's happening, that you have this sort of need for sugar, and then perhaps you're more reliant on carbohydrates. So I do encourage people to sort of watch their intake of sugar and balance their carbs throughout the day. And that I do kind of have it laid out like that in the meal plan. You'll sort of see that I have, the proteins and the carbs are and the fats are all pretty balanced throughout the day. And then I have some recommendations specifically for workouts, because right around your workout, you may need a little more carb. But that's just some general recommendations, but kind of going back to that kind of hormone piece and a little bit more about specific, needs for women. That's some couple of things I would want to mention as well. And then I'm going to share my screen one more time, because I did think of some questions for you guys that, I kind of based off of what you had asked me. And then feel free, if there's anything I'm missing, to just, like ask those questions on the side. But I often have people ask me what diet is best for me. And I think with nutrition, it's so confusing. We have, you go online and you type in nutrition, or what diet should I do, or what diet is best for me, or, I have this problem, what diet should I follow? And you get all of these, kind of differing opinions. Somebody might tell you you need to go, totally low carb, and someone else, you might read something else that says that you should go vegan. And there seems to be like these extremes on every side, and very dogmatic thoughts about nutrition, like, oh, it worked for me, therefore it must work for you. And I want you to be very cautious about that sort of thinking, because it doesn't work like that. Most people have sort of somewhat unique needs. I mean, we're all human, but each one of us seems to do better on a certain type of diet, and it may not be at an extreme. It may be somewhere in the middle. So just keeping in mind, like, I can't tell you what diet is best for you. Like, I can't tell anyone what diet is best. When they come to talk to me, it's about figuring out what diet, or kind of what, not even diet, because I don't like to think of nutrition, but what nutrition plan, or what types of foods, or what overall sort of nutrition, you know, uh, fueling strategy is going to be best for you. And that's kind of where I help people. But I don't really know. I can't look at someone and tell them that. It just takes sometimes a little bit of asking them what they've tried in the past, and then moving on and sort of having them try different strategies and seeing how they feel, where they feel the best. Another one would be concerns about preservatives in food. And then unfortunately, Mary had sent me an art. She tried to send me, I didn't get the article, unfortunately, but she did ask something about the maltodextrin preservative in foods. And so again, when I was talking about sort of limiting some of those processed foods, when you do that, you do limit the preservatives, obviously, in your foods, because more of the processed foods are going to be higher in preservatives. But one thing I want to keep you guys to keep in mind is that, you don't have to, I don't want you to be like so worried about the food you're eating that you don't, you're not eating, so, or if you feel like you have to restrict your diet because you're looking at every single thing and preservative on the labels. And I mean, it's so good to be looking at labels and to be aware of that stuff, but you also don't want to have a fear, necessarily develop a fear of foods. So one thing I say is, yes, I mean, yes and no when it comes to preservatives. I think something to keep in mind is that our bodies do a great job of detoxifying. The liver is a detoxification organ, and it actually, when we're sleeping well and we're fueling well and eating generally really pretty healthy, the liver does a fantastic job of detoxifying. It's when we start to maybe not take care of ourselves, we're overstressed, we're not sleeping well, we're not eating well. That's when sometimes my concern gets a little bit greater about some of these added, preservatives and things like that in food, because perhaps we get to a point where our body is just not able to detoxify as well. So in general, if you are occasionally eating foods like that, that have preservatives in them anyways, I wouldn't be as concerned. It's more if you just aren't eating well and you don't feel like you have all of these other things optimized, then detoxification can be an issue. And that kind of leads into the next thing about detox diets. I'm not a big fan of detox like, it kind of depends, because I think there's a lot of crap out there when it comes to detox. Like, you can't drink a drink that has maple syrup and cayenne pepper and lemon. I think that's one. um, Sorry, I got a little pop-up thing, but you can't have those things, in your, drinking that sort of concoction. And it's really, there's nothing about that that's going to cause you to detox any better. In fact, I have no idea where any of that came from. So you want to make sure that if you're going to be doing something, and juice fasting is another example, essentially you're just sort of starving yourself. And when you do sort of do these fasts, you do actually have a release of toxins and things out of the cell. But the biggest problem with that is that then where do those toxins go? And sometimes people can actually get very sick because they do these sort of cleanses, but they don't have that supportive piece where they're taking in nutrients that actually bind to the toxins and help them like get rid of them. And so instead they have this sort of like huge huge like release of toxins, and then they just feel like crap, and they're not actually doing anything to get rid of them. So you want to make sure if you're going to be following any protocol or detox diet, that you're aware of that. Most of the products out there are not actually that beneficial. I don't ever do any sort of like, strict detox. Occasionally I will help people sort of with supporting their body and detoxifying and that sort of thing, but I don't actually ever recommend anyone follow like a specific detox like diet or supplement plan. And then what about sleep and stress? I do think, like I talked about before, it's really really important that people are sleeping well, and stress actually can really impact the body in negative ways and especially our digestive system. I think we're finally starting to get to this point where we realize that there's a huge connection between our brain and what our mind and what's going on in the body. And I see this a lot of times with people who come into me and they're like, oh, I have this gut thing going on, I'm bloated all the time, I have gut pain. And to talk to them a little more, they've been going through like a ton of stress, or they've had a really stressful event, and they're sort of, that's how it's manifesting, is in the gut. And so whatever's, maybe they've had some sort of bacterial like their shifts, or they've had sort of this dysbiosis going on, and it's all related to stress, or maybe there's something else that's kind of causing that. But it generally, not always, but sometimes I do see that there's that huge connection. So anything you can do to really relieve stress is going to be helpful. And yes, they both affect nutrition. In fact, there's a lot of research out there that says that when we don't sleep well, we tend to reach for sugary foods, which is like kind of a no-brainer, because I know I do that all the time. If I don't sleep well, I don't, it's like takes me a lot more willpower to be able to say no to sugary things, and I tend to really crave, want candies and things like that. And so it's just because you get that quick fix of the quick energy bolt, and then you kind of crash, and then you want another energy bolt. And so it's this vicious cycle that can occur. And you're more prone to that when you haven't been sleeping well, obviously, because the brain is kind of looking for something to keep it going, and the body's like, oh, I need energy. And so if you can try to obviously have better sleep habits, that would help tremendously. And then also just looking at that sleep part as well, a lot of times when we don't sleep well, or actually most people, when they don't sleep well, they don't actually metabolize carbohydrates as well. So you have this sort of double whammy going on, where you crave sweets, but you're not metabolizing those carbohydrates as well. And so that could become problematic. And then counting calories, I did talk a little bit about that. Not necessarily is it important for weight loss. I think it's important to establish kind of what your needs are for calories, and maybe where, maybe recording a little bit to see. But I don't think it's necessarily the only important thing. I think making sure that you're just you're eating plenty of fruits and vegetables. In fact, sometimes if you can just start adding in more of those really healthy, nutrient-dense foods, and not really focus on calories per se, but you're focusing more on eating healthy and taking care of your body and sleeping better and less stress, like the body will just, it's amazing to me how the body will just sort of like start like, I don't know, like releasing the, like you just have this sort of release, and your body will start losing weight. And so it's just pretty fascinating to me how the body works and how these things all are kind of connected. So calorie counting isn't always necessary. It might be just something you can do occasionally or in the short term. So those Thanks for all of you who were able to attend the live webinar. And for those of you who were unable to attend, that's fine. Hopefully you got a lot out of this recording. Just a reminder that if you guys do want to do that 20-minute consult, just to go ahead and get a hold of me via email and we can set that up. Otherwise, it was a real pleasure meeting all of you this past Saturday, and I really hope that if I don't hear from you again or see you within the program, that I get to see you out in the community at some point. Good night, and thank you all for attending the webinar. Bye.